Next, we're going to talk about the China-Russia deal. This is actually quite fascinating because I don't know how to put this, to the less aware viewer, this China-Russia deal was going to happen. Does it mean anything? What's the big deal? It's China, it's Russia, it's over there, it's on the other side of the world, has nothing to do with Canada. Does this really matter? So if you're kind of an unaware viewer, kind of maybe that's what you're thinking. I know, maybe I would have thought that at one time, but this kind of deal has ripple effects, not only immediately, but quite frankly, most of these ripple effects will pay off in 5 years, 10 years, 15 years. And it happened yesterday, March 21st, 2023. First and foremost, maybe Patrick, if you're up to speed on the deal, describe kind of what the deal was about, and then let's pontificate on where we think these ripple effects are going to show up.
Well, at the end of the day, what Russia and Xi Jinping did in China was they signed a deal. They signed an agreement together to exchange and to pay each other back and forth in the ruble and in the yuan. And so guess what? They're cutting out the American dollar. And so as much as we put pressure on Putin, for example, in terms of sanctions and all the things that we did in that regard, guess what's happening over there? Putin is hanging out with China. He's hanging out with all of these other countries, India, for example, becoming pals. And he's really expanding. What's going to ultimately happen is he's going to expand the BRICS. There's already a lineup of countries that want to be part of BRICS. I don't know what they're going to call, what that acronym will become. And to the degree he also paid off a bunch of debt of Africa. So he's building his own kind of divisive world that in terms of doing business. So as much as we've laid these sanctions on him, he's simply going to other countries and getting the goods. And of course, so money isn't, or we're not exporting, and I mean we as in the West, is not exporting the goods that we would have exported in the past. So, at the end of the day, what we see start to happen into the future, and when we have to kind of look into the future, is it's very, very likely that at some point the U.S. could lose reserve currency status. Not going to happen tomorrow, but that is certainly a risk. I mean, if you want to talk to some of those that are, the big Bitcoin bugs or the big gold bugs or whatever that might be, that kind of alternative currency world, they're saying it's definitely U.S. is going to lose reserve currency or reserve currency status. I just don't know how quickly that's going to happen. I think the trajectory has been set, and I do believe it's going to come to that, but it may not be in a lifetime that we see or care. Maybe.
Yeah, gotcha. Well, speak for yourself, Patrick. Maybe not your lifetime.
Yeah, you're a young man. You're just a young man. You got it. I keep resisting. Whenever I'm talking to you, JG, I have to say that I keep resisting. I saying I remember when. I try and avoid that saying.
So a couple different thoughts on this, Patrick. First and foremost, for those that are watching this and kind of don't know what you're talking about, losing, global the reserve currency. There's a great book by Ray Dalio, The Changing World Order, that you should read if you want to know what Patrick's talking about. If you want to see kind of where one guy sees it going, based on a very interesting study of, I think, 1,600 years of data. Go check that out. Go read that book. It's a very, very fascinating book. But Patrick, I think this actually stems back, and we actually saw this, and I know that we're talking about the China-Russia deal, and there's a lot to discuss here, but this actually started when COVID first happened. And we saw this. We've been living in this world of globalization for the last 30, 40 years, where we've been progressively getting bigger as a global community. And when COVID happened, that was over. That was done. That was done. We went, in my world, we went to a more regional approach, and you started seeing the US bring back stuff onshore, and you started seeing Canada brings back stuff onshore. And I'm not talking about just masks and respirators. I'm talking about the semiconductors that are being moved out of Taiwan back to the US, that are being built in Dallas, just as an example. And I think that the world of globalization is going to be shifting a lot. And this is an example of that. And this is one of those repercussions where Canada, the US, Mexico, and even down into Central America and Southern America are going to see a much closer alliance than with the kind of the east side of the world. Fascinating where this is all going to go. And you and I actually talked about this when we did a special at one of our live events during COVID. We talked about how the world of regionalization could really shift the landscape of real estate. Too big of a conversation for this particular episode. But the point is that we are going to a world of regionalization, in my view, not globalization. And this is an example of that, where you have two countries that are kind of given the finger to many parts of the world, saying, listen, we're going to do business together, hell the repercussions to pay. And this does open up the door to a lot of different things, like back to the conversation about digital currency, back to the conversation about U.S. losing their reserves status in terms of their currency, and in terms of this changing world order. Very interesting where this is going to go, but man, it is going to unravel, and it's going to be messy on the way down, Patrick. That's what I predict.
Well, no, I think, and I agree 100%. I think there's a couple things that we have to point out here. First and foremost is that, we're living our life, we're doing our thing. We got to get up, we go to work in the morning, we provide the services, we provide value, we just keep doing things and moving forward. In parallel to all of that, we have to be aware of what's happening on a global scale. So, people will look at it and not recognize or not see it on mainstream media, so they may not be aware of just how much unrest there is in other countries. France is literally melting down with not just riots in the street in Paris, it's right across France. We're seeing huge upset in what's in the residents or the people of that country, pushing back against what's happening with some of these government initiatives. So we have to look and say, outside of what the risks are in terms of our own country, we are at the effect of what's happening globally. So this goes back to, as investors, we say, well, where do we put our capital? If it's not safe in the bank, and what do we do? And there's no real estate for sale. But this is where I think, the extra 10%, if you will, it's why we hear the stories of the 1%ers or the 10%ers. It's the reality is that it takes extra effort to actually plan and know that stuff's going on. Don't let it be too big and distracted, but plan for it. So in other words, hope for the best, keep going forward as if things are going to work out fine because we've got great leadership, all of those things, got it. We're just going to keep moving forward. But in the meantime, where do we hedge our bet? And, we talked about it on many shows and with our members many times. We still believe strongly that real estate is a way and a place to put your capital in order to keep it working and kind of keep it safe, if you will. Then if you want to look at things like Bitcoin, you want to look at precious metals, these are other alternatives that are actually hedging on the potential risk of what's going on a global macro scale. The challenge, JG, is if you're not looking for it, if you're actually not doing the research, a lot of this is just not showing up on mainstream media intentionally. Now, I don't disagree with it, by the way. I mean, if people really understood what was going on a bigger picture, I think there would be kind of like people freaking out because there's a lot going on. So that's what I got to say about it. And here was my test. So it wasn't even a test. As you know, we went to Edmonton, we celebrated my mom's 95th birthday. Awesome. Love the fact that my mom's still here to celebrate at 95. And in that whole party was a bunch of nieces and nephews who are now in that 35 to 40 range. And as I'm having conversations with a couple of my astute nephews who are very accomplished and are doing a lot of stuff, they literally have no clue what I'm talking about. I said CBDC and they went, "What's that?" And I kind of told them, and they go, "Oh, yeah. Like, I know what you're talking about." They don't have a clue what I was talking about and what the impact of CBDC could represent. And so this all to say that people are not as informed as we think they should be, if they want to stay ahead of it and actually succeed as investors, JG.
I think this is going to take decades to unravel. I think this is one major domino, which opens up the door to, CBDC is 100% happening. What we're going to do about it is different. But I actually think CBDC is going to pave the way for other digital currencies, which is what we're more interested in than anything else. So that's for another time. One of the things as part of the China-Russia deal that was not, from my research, was not part of the deal yet, but China's pushing for it hard, is they essentially want to rewrite the pipeline. They want to reroute the pipeline from Europe and send it straight to China. And that hasn't happened yet, Patrick. But when it does happen, my question for you, Mr. Alberta, is what are these effects on our prairie provinces, including Alberta, Saskatchewan, that produce a lot of energy? And does this open up more opportunity for us here in Canada?
Well, we'd like to think it does open up more opportunity. At the end of the day, we're at the full capacity of what we can refine, because ultimately that's what we're trying to sell. Without these pipelines, without transportation, it takes years for these things to develop and to evolve. It's really hard to increase capacity We could increase refinement capacity, then we don't have it, but it even takes time to increase refinement capacity. So we're kind of limited to what it is. But Alberta and oil aside, Canada is a country of commodities. We have what the world needs. I say it time and time again. I'm still just shocked, and I have no idea what the explanation is that why are we not actually exporting more of our commodities? We can do it environmentally and in an environmentally responsible way. We're just not. It always has kind of stymied me, and I'm just not smart enough to figure out why our imports and exports are kind of balanced. Why are we not? Our exports should be through the roof relative to what we're importing. It's not the case. And so I don't know what's going on in that regard. But when it comes to oil, and we're going to bump up against the capacity of what we can actually even refine and then transport. Those are capacity issues. That's government.
This domino, which is a big domino. It's not the first domino, but it's a big domino that has an effect on this new, what I would call, regional world instead of this global world. This new regionalization movement that I think we're going to see in the next 10, 15, 20 years, that will have an effect on real estate for sure. We did a conference, Patrick, on this. I forget the name of the conference now. We did it during COVID, and we talked about how the world could be very different in the next 5 and 10 years. And this is what we talked about then. And people were asking ourselves, what's going to cause this new world? We're living it right now. This is what we talked about 2 years ago during these conferences. It's starting to happen. So fascinating that we're seeing kind of some of the predictions we had happening in real time here.
Yeah, it's all starting to unfold. And that includes, by the way, 2 years ago, I presented and even talked about 15-minute cities. And it was very, kind of new in the conversation, but ultimately we're starting to hear and ramp that up, the whole conversation around 15-minute cities. And I have to really start to consider, what does that mean to real estate? And don't have the answer to that today, but as well as 5G, and what is that going to mean when we start to look at the technology that's going to allow us to drive? All of these things are happening, and they're really in progress. They're probably even further ahead than we're aware of. And so we look at smart homes, smart cities. It's going to change the game for sure. And I don't think it's going to be, 20 years is a long time. I think we're going to start to see the effects of it in 5 and 10 years, 5 years for sure. I think we're going to start to see it.
I think we're already seeing some of the effects. They're just maybe not on everyone's purview, but we're already starting to see some effects. This is something we're going to monitor very, very closely, the China-Russia deal, and report back, no doubt about it, because it will have a repercussion for a long time to come. So enough on that, Patrick.
If you like what you learned here, go to the description below and subscribe for our free Insiders newsletter, where you can also stay up to date for our upcoming events and our courses.
If you want to see more stuff like this, click here. If you want to see the entire show, click there.